He was Canadian leader through the controversial strike and blockade of the Windsor Ford plant in 1945. Burt's funeral will be at the Walter Kelly Funeral Home in Windsor on Friday. He will be buried in Green Hill Cemetery in Kingsville. Friends and family remembered George Burt today as a tireless labor leader. They gathered in Windsor for Burt's funeral. The 300 mourners included members of Parliament, union leaders, and many of the union members he had fought so hard for. More from Kim Christie.
Beyond all else, George Burt was a union man, and that was reflected today in the background of the mourners. Their working lives were somehow touched by George Burt, and for that they had to say goodbye. The CAW is George Burt's legacy. It was shaped by the sometimes violent events that led to the formation of the UAW.
My personal reflections of him were when I was a young man leading a strike. He came to the bargaining table and helped find a settlement to that, and ultimately 3 years later he asked me to join the staff for 3 months. So he was certainly an outstanding trade union leader in his time and really put the base in for the UAW in Canada.
For 30 years, George Burt was embroiled in every automotive-related labor dispute. He was a relentless organizer, a tireless picket, and a confidant to labor's most respected leader, Walter Reuther. When George Burt finally settled into retirement, he had volumes of stories to tell.
Well, of the big three in the automobile industry, I would say that Ford was the toughest nut to crack.
Burt could proudly say he'd led Canadian auto workers as their first Canadian UAW director. He also held top posts in the OFL and CLC. But when he was in a reminiscent mood, he remembered those early days, when volatile strikes were occasionally diffused with humor.
2 or 3 of these sailors come along, and one of them come over. He said, "You Mr. Burt?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "You're in charge then here?" I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Well, you don't need to be afraid of the provincial police attacking you tomorrow." I said, "Why?" "We expected them to clear off the picket line because their purpose was to open up the powerhouse, and the powerhouse was organized on a legal strike, and we struck the powerhouse, and that took the power out of the Ford." So these sailors said, "You don't need to be afraid of them attacking you tomorrow." And so I said, "Why?" He said, "We put Phenaments in their soup and coffee tonight." And he says, "They'll be running to the bathroom all day tomorrow." And they did. We never saw a provincial policeman at all.
During the funeral service, Burt was called a great Canadian. His words and actions will form an important chapter in labor history.
I think he did more for the automobile workers than anyone.
Of all the words to remember George Burt by, perhaps the best were written by Burt himself when he wrote, "We have advanced finally because we the people do learn." Kim Christie, CBC News.